Hi there and welcome to the Language Gym. Today I'm going to talk to you about reading and more specifically about reading as modeling. What is reading as modeling? Well, reading as modeling is based on the same principle as listening as modeling. In other words, what it means is when you plan your reading sequence, when you plan your reading tasks, you are doing so with the aim to prepare the students for writing, or if you're using reading and listening synergistically together, for writing and speaking. But before we go there, let's see what happens, very concisely, what happens in the human brain when we read. Well, just as happens with listening, what we do is we use two sets of processes in synergy. One set of processes is called top-down processing skills, and the other one, bottom-up processing skills, just as happens in listening. So when we read a text, and we normally process the text sentence by sentence at high speed in our natural language, in the first language, so about 250 to 300 words per minute. We use a combination of our knowledge of the world. So, for instance, if we are reading a text about holidays, a problem, an accident, or happened during the holidays, you will automatically and consciously retrieve all the information, use all the information to do with accidents during the holidays, all your stereotypes, what we scientifically call schemata, about what normally happens in those kind of situations. This would be, of course, biased by your personal experiences, your culture, the experiences you had whenever you had an accident during the holidays. And you combine this knowledge of the world, this background knowledge, with information that arises from the text, from your processing of different levels of the text. What do I mean by processing different levels of the text? Well, we know from research, and I've been very simplistic here, that as we read the text, we process the text first at the level of spelling and sound, what we call dual processing. Yes, sound. As I said in the previous video, language learning, language processing is mediated by sound at all times. So we know that even when we read silently, we are actually activating the phonological loop or the articulatory loop in our working memory. In other words, we are subvocalizing whatever our eyes are basically processing. We also synergistically, simultaneously process the words at the level of spelling. So this dual processing, this dual coding is an essential synergy in processing the written word. The second level, of course, is lexical retrieval. We need to recognize the meaning of words, and we basically match what's in our long-term memory to what we see. Occasionally, when there's the odd word that we don't understand, again, we use our background knowledge, knowledge of the world, or strategies, inferencing strategies to infer the meaning from context. The third level is parsing. What is parsing? Parsing, as I mentioned again in the previous video, is now processing the text at the level of patterns, at the level of patterns, syntactic patterns, but also morphological patterns, and the level of morphemes, for instance, endings. Yeah, for instance, at the level of word class. So, for instance, what part of speech is it? What role is this word performing in the sentence? Is the agent? Is it the recipient? So anything to do with grammar and syntax and patterns, the way words are glued together, including function words, connectives, conjunctions, is basically processed at this level. And in the first 200 to 400 milliseconds, the brain is just processing all these physical aspects of the text, focusing on meaning only at the end. So At the end of this process, the brain has extracted cues from each level: spelling, sound, lexis, grammar, syntax, bound morphemes, and then in the meaning phase has put this together with the information coming from our personal experiences, our knowledge of the world, and sentence by sentence, the brain is reconstructing the text. Each time the brain moves from one sentence to the next, it carries with itself what we call co-text. What is a co-text? A co-text means everything that you have extracted from the text so far. So we carry in our working memory, and so we move to the next sentence, we use all this co-text to make sense of the next sentence. And each time that we move to the next sentence, our representation of the text expands and gets better. And this process is recursive, because very often you have to go back to think, hang on, maybe I got that wrong. Did I get it right? And you might actually be that a new sentence changes your interpretation of what you actually elicited understood earlier. So as you can see, it's a recursive process. It's a bit like writing an essay. You know, as you go forward, you start discovering more and reshaping what you already have reconstructed of the text. As you can see, there are quite a few skills and processes embedded in the reading process. And just as I said in my previous video, students need to practice all these skills. Now think about the typical reading comprehension that you stage in the class. Does that actually practice spelling and sound, identification and reproduction, lexical retrieval, grammatical and syntactic parsing, focus on discourse building and meaning? Meaning only, isn't it? Because most of the time, the typical reading comprehension is a text and a number of questions on that text. And most of the time is basically a rehearsal of the exam. But in year 7, 8, and 9 in England, or in the first years of any other course around the world, when there is not a high-stake exam at the end of that particular cycle, do you need to just practice exam-like tasks? Not really. You're building capacity, aren't you? You're trying to model effective reading. So reading as modeling is also preparing the students, equipping the students with the skills they need for reading. So the phonological processing, orthographical processing, lexical retrieval, parsing skills, meaning building, and discourse building skills. And the kids need loads of practice to get to the point where they can be so fluent that they can recognize words at the speed of 250, 300 words per minute. That's quite a big goal, isn't it? It's not easy at all. Well, one of the ways in which you can develop RAM, reading as modeling, with beginners is by using a technique that you, if you know, follow my blog and you know my work, you will have heard hundreds of times, a technique called narrow reading. Narrow reading was kind of invented by Stephen Krashen, who came up with the idea of narrow listening and narrow reading. So his idea of narrow listening and narrow reading is that these texts are kind of similar texts. His original idea was that you would go around as a learner or as a teacher interviewing native speakers and ask all of them, 5 or 6 of them, the same question. And the same question would be, I don't know, something like, what do you do at the weekend? And of course, being the same question and people belonging to the same sort of culture or subculture, they would answer the same way, providing the same sort of language, the same sort of discourse frame. You know, where did you go the weekend? The weekend, I went fishing with my father. The weather was nice. I had a lot of fun. I stayed there 3 hours, 4 hours. We had a picnic and left. Another person will, instead of fishing, will tell you that they went to the stadium. Whilst I kind of understand the way Krashen went about it with this idea, I always thought that it was a bit risky, because you go interviewing people. First of all, it's difficult to find people, but even if you get people to talk to you about the same sort of thing, you can't really control the input. And being an input freak, believing that you have to be an input freak at the beginning with your students and really control that input, making sure that the students not only receive comprehensible input, 98% comprehensible input, but also that the input is highly patterned, highly repetitive. Because if a student is supposed to get from reading to writing, and you want them to have really learned the patterns, chunks, and language embedded in that input, it means that the input has to be highly patterned and highly repetitive. So my version of narrow reading and narrow listenings differs from Krashen in terms of the extent of highly patternedness of the input and repetitiveness of the input. So the merits of Krashen approach is that the input is more natural, more naturalistic, whereas my input, as with beginners, is artificial. These texts are created or adapted so that they are flooded with occurrences of the target patterns. As you know, my approach put patterns and chunks first, not single words. If you look at textbooks instead, they think about single words most of the time. So what do? They usually start a unit for beginners with 4 different paragraphs saying exactly the same thing, but in 4 different or 5 different ways, using completely different discourse frames, which can be quite disorientating for kids. Imagine instead using the same structured text, the same highly patterned text 4 times. You will have flooded that text with occurrences of the target words. You would have flooded them with the target patterns and chunks. In other words, you have 4 to 6 completely identical texts, except that 10, 12 words in that text, it's a short text, by the way, 10, 20, 12 words are different from text to text. So for instance, what I normally do is I create my text. Imagine, and I don't know, it could be describing a weekend with your family. I will then copy and paste that text 6 times. I will then change the key details. For instance, last weekend I went to Madrid with my family. The next one could be, instead of last week, I went to Madrid. 2 days ago, I went to Barcelona with my family. And the third text could be, instead of last week's and 2 days ago, yesterday I was to Barcelona with my family. So I would keep the discourse frame completely identical in order to ensure that the patterns are always the same. And on the other hand, I'll make sure that there still is a challenge for for them to learn those 12 words, whilst feeling safe all the way through, from the first text to the 6th, if you had 6, or to 4 if you had 4. I usually use 4 or 6 for some weird reason. And the whole idea is that this way you have a number of advantages. Well, number 1, loads of recycling of the same patterns. So implicitly, through sheer exposure, through loads of processing, the students are going to learn those 6, those patterns. 2, they feel safe, because of course that stability, that highly patternedness helps them. retain and understand, just like nursery rhymes do. This is the same principle as nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes have the same reassuring pattern. They may change a few words here and there, but the pattern is constantly the same. The third advantage, of course, is that you are giving the students a sense of achievement by getting them from one text to text 6. So wow, I've done 6 texts and understood them all. You're facilitating cognitive load because each time they practice those 12 words always in the same discourse frame. That means that when they get to text 6, they have routinized the various, the structure, the connectives. So it becomes quite effortless to do this. In a lot of lesson demos that I've done around the world, I've always staged narrow listening, narrow reading, because I know they work for this reason. There's a lot of research on narrow reading, not my type of narrow reading, but less structured narrow readings, which show that students learn more vocabulary. And if you flood this narrow reading text with words which are usually not noticed using other techniques, the students appear to actually acquire them more successfully. Things like adverbs or prepositions, for instance. There's a lot of techniques, a lot of tasks that you will perform with narrow readings. But if you want to be deliberate, as I am as a teacher, in targeting specific skills, then you would use each of these narrow reading texts to practice a different skills. With one, you could focus on the spelling. With one, you could focus on sounds by doing reading aloud activities, or listening, for instance, gapping the text, and the students are supposed to write in the gaps. That would focus on transcription and decoding skills. Another text could be exploited for vocabulary. It could be single words. Another one could be instead exploited for chunks. With another one, you could focus on grammar, and it could be word endings, or it could be word order, syntax. So what I'm trying to hint at here is that you can use narrow readings to practice all the skills that we identified earlier when we were talking about how the brain processes reading. Gianfranco, why don't you do that with just one text? Well, you can. By all means, with a highly motivated group, for instance, you could. Problem is that you're basically going through the same text many times over. You limited the sense of achievement. Whereas if the student and the variety of input, but if you use the same text 6 times, modifying it slightly, first of all, the kids won't even notice that it's the same text, trust me, because I tried for many years. But you increase the variety of input that the kids are going to get, while still keeping the same text. You may change the key details, the key words, but you are giving them loads of opportunities to process the same input from different angles, but also with a greater variety of vocabulary. Now, let's look at what a narrow reading sequence could look like. Now, bear in mind that I'm using my website, so there's a lot of constraints because, of course, being a website, you're not there, so you cannot do a lot of other fun stuff, a lot of other fun games that I normally stage with a narrow reading sequence. And the reason why I'm focusing on my website, well, first of all, is to plug my website, of course, but secondly is because in these days, because of the coronavirus outbreak, we are stuck at home, and a lot of the learning is happening remotely. And when you teach remotely, what is the most important thing? The most important thing is that there is a lot of recycling. The tasks are graded very carefully. that you are deliberate in what you are targeting, and you are clear about where the sequence is going, and you're avoiding cognitive load. So what I'm trying to achieve with the narrow reading sequences that we put on the language gym currently, and it's a developing part of the language gym. You'll find many more in the weeks to come. I'm creating about 2 or 3 of these a day. Is exactly a sequence geared for remote learning. I'll show you what it looks like. First of all, let me find that I'm not very technologically savvy, so I hope it works. Okay, so when you get into the language gym and you go to language, you'll find, for instance, Spanish here. And to find the narrow reading sequences, you have to go to workouts, click on reading. I just realized I didn't share the screen. Sorry, I'm going to share it now. So here it is. So let's go back. I'm not very good at technology, apologies. So you click on reading modules. Let me go back another step so that you understand where we are if you have subscribed to the language gym, of course. So you go to the workouts, you click on reading modules, you click on beginners, and here you find already 5 narrow reading units. In this particular unit, there's 2 subunits. Let's go on food and drinks general. So here, it's a unit, as you can see, it's quite meaty. And I don't know if you can see that, but you'll find here pre-reading, about 6 activities. Then you have the narrow reading per se, and then you'll have consolidation activities. This is based on the triadic approach that I called PIP or PIP, pre-reading tasks, in-reading tasks, post-reading or consolidation tasks. So the idea is that you facilitated learning and cognitive load by first acquainting the students with the words and chunks they're going to find in the text. You're activating prior knowledge, which is also going to facilitate and ease cognitive load. So the students go to the narrow reading with all the prior knowledge activated. All the words they didn't necessarily know or didn't know that well kind of practiced, so quite activated in their brains. And once they've gone through the narrow readings, which will be, in this case, are 9 texts, each exploited from a different angle to achieve that objective I mentioned earlier, which is hitting all the different levels of processing, you will then start the pushed output phase. The pushed output phase starts here, activity 16, where you have quite a few, 8 activities, which again, according to the principle of task grading, start from very easy and they gradually progress to challenging and very challenging. And the end of the instructional sequence is here, activity 23 or 24, with guided writing. So in mind, when I started this sequence, I thought by the end of the sequence, they're going to do this task. So write it 80 to 100 words paragraph saying your name, your age, what food you love to eat and why, what food you like to eat and why, what food you can't stand and why, what food you don't like and why, what your favorite fruit and vegetables are and why, what your favorite drink is and why. So these are beginners. You would have presented the language through sentence builders. Hopefully you would have done some other activities before getting here, or maybe you just assign this after you have covered the topics of likes and dislikes in the context of food, and you're doing remote learning and you want your student to consolidate the chunks, patterns and words that you taught. So let's go back to the very first activities just to illustrate how one of these sequences develops. So first, just a classic gapped, not a gapped sentence, actually just a matchup. So los dulces, and you choose sweets, las verduras, let's find it, vegetables, and so forth. So very basic, very easy. We are just word level stuff. Now, a multiple choice quiz. Now we are focusing on chunks which express like and dislikes. Me encanta, I love. Me chifla, I'm crazy about, and so forth. We move now to a full-blown chunks, slightly longer. So as you can see, the task grading is from working with very single words to multiple choice chunks, and now even bigger chunks. Me encanta el pescado, I love fish. Sorry, the surface is a bit slippery. Here we go. I like coffee sweet. Me encanta el café. El café me gusta dulce. There, and so that's it. Now, next activity, it becomes a bit more complex. These are gapped sentences now, so we need to provide the right missing word. So we're working now on collocations, and me encantan carrots, las zanahorias. Yes, we put the English in brackets on purpose. We hope that the students actually notice the differences between the language. And after much exposure, especially if the kids have been taught the expression me encanta, me gusta plus noun, they will notice that me encanta las zanahorias is a different structure full of carrots. The Spaniards don't say I love carrots, they say carrots enchant me. Yeah, so it's a completely different structure syntactically. Now, next, a typical semantic processing activity, categorizing words. We know that this kind of sorting activities creates a stronger memory trace because of the analysis and problem solving that it involves. Next, now a sentence puzzle. The sentence puzzle, it's an excellent activity. Any puzzles, any text reconstruction tasks are brilliant because they force the student to think about syntax, and because the English is right next to it, as you can see, they need to think also about the meaning of words. A sentence puzzle without the English is less effective in this respect and can feel a bit random. But this way, the kids are mapping the jumbled up sentence against the English structure. So they think about the grammar, the syntax, and of course, about the meaning of words. A brilliant pre-reading tasks. And then slightly more high stake, but isn't. We start with the actual reading comprehension. This is find the Spanish equivalent. So the first text is here, very simple. It's all about basically what kind of food this person likes. So the first goes, hello, my name is Alejandro. What do I like eating? I like veggies. I eat them every day. The next one will be a different name. Instead of verduras, it could be, I don't know, instead of veggies would be meat. Instead of my favorite veggies, he'll say my favorite meat is, I don't know, chicken instead of spinach, but the structure will be absolutely identical. And we have a feature here, this little globe is the hint button. So if the kids is not confident, they can press there. At the moment, we don't have a scoring system. It's coming next week or the week after next. So when the children kind of cheat, they will be actually penalized. But you know what? It's a good thing. A non-confident kid can never go first by pressing the hint button. And as they do that, they will learn some words. And it doesn't matter because there's going to be so many other tasks that the kids can do without cheating that they will learn eventually anyway. So this is just a chunk recognition task. Next, another chunk recognition task. You may want to cover things you didn't cover in the previous activity. So you will look for chunks this time that cover other vocabulary. Now, I'm really not good with technology, apologies. Now, after we worked on Javier text with find the Spanish equivalent of these chunks twice, now we exploit it from a different angle. Now is choose the correct option. The kids are given 3 different options for for the reading comprehension text, for instance, he never drinks tea, occasionally drinks tea, he often drinks tea. Here it says nunca bebo té, so I never drink. He never drinks tea. There you go. So now we're working at reading comprehension levels. We covered vocabulary, now reading comprehension. Here again, reading comprehension, again, 3 options, just using a different text this time, Marcelo. So we've done Javier, we have done, what's this guy's name? Miguel. Now we're covering Marcelo's likes and dislikes. Marcelo loves meat, especially carne de cordero, lamb. He eats meat occasionally, every day, or often, todos los días, every day. So there's a lot of vocabulary recognition involved, and of course, meaning building. Now we are now reading 5, reading comprehension, gapped translation. Again, there's a hint button here, and the idea is that you're basically asking them to translate the key bits of the text. You will, of course, focus on the bits that you want them to learn. So, hi, my name is Javier, easy, low stake, to make everyone succeed. What do I prefer to comer? So it would be eat. I prefer la carne, meat, and so forth. Next step, now we focus on grammar. So this is what we call functional processing, and it is basically focusing on identifying the function the words have in the sentence and text. So in this case, for instance, an adjective beginning with R, and the answer is rico, ricos and proteínas here. So the kids now, they would have encountered ricos and proteínas in the other texts, of course, so they're quite familiar with it. And the good thing is that if a child doesn't know what an adjective is, by doing a few adjectives, they'll possibly start understanding their sweet and delicious accents, adjectives. So, you know, they may form an idea what an adjective is. This is jigsaw reading. The kids need to arrange the text in the right order. So, hola, me llamo Susana, vivo en Valencia, como carne con patatas todos los días. Now, as you notice, every single sentence ends either in a preposition or an article, mostly preposition, only 2 articles. Why? Because we want them to focus on function words. Function words are so very important. They constitute less than 1% of the entire lexicon of a language, but believe it or not, 50% of the words in each text consist of function words. It's extremely important for them to actually learn them. The key, they are the words that glue all the content words together. And now that jigsaw reading, this time not focused on function words. So now we basically covered vocabulary here, grammar, and also discourse building. A very important skill to have. Now more challenging because it all happens in the target language. Not just the text, but also the questions. Elena prefiere comer, las hamburguesas y las bistecs. And what option is that? Carne. A Elena le gusta más la carne de cordero que el pollo. Yes. Cool. So now that the kids have exploited this type of text, which, as I said, are basically 9 near identical texts, they've been exposed to the same patterns and the same sort of language about 9 times, plus the pre-reading tasks. We're talking about 16 different activities. Now it's about consolidation and moving from the reading to the writing. Match English and Spanish. Prefiero, I prefer. Easy, quite straightforward. You don't want to start the writing process with a high-stake activity. Now we are pushing them a little bit more. This time now the challenge is to do a gap sentence. Me gusta mucho, like meat, la carne. Me encantan los mariscos. And again, we still have the English in brackets here because you want to grade the challenge. You don't want them to go and use Google Translator or any other way of cheating. Now, gap sentences. This is a bit more challenging because it's all a gap fill from memory. Me llamo. We start with a very easy one. Me encanta la carne porque es. They're more likely to write rico if they're weak, but it's actually rica. There you go. Oh, sabrosa. There you go. Oh, now it becomes a bit more challenging. Complete the words. Mi bebida preferida. I chose more difficult words here than the ones in the previous exercise, but I'm still giving the first letter to make them feel less stressed. And now we start with the retrieval practice of a bit more challenging. In the future, we're going to remove the hint patterns for the end of the sequence because we really wanted to try and rely on their memory of the vocabulary. And as you can see, we are talking about retrieval practice at small chunks level. So here was retrieval practice with just one word, and now it's becoming much more challenging. And here we got to full sentences, from small chunks to full sentences, but the sentences are still quite easy. I don't like tomatoes, I eat legs. Let's push them even further. Now, it's not just a sentence with one clause, but it's two clauses with a connective and a like and dislike. I love meat because it's tasty, I can't stand fish because it is disgusting, and so forth. Finally, the kids will be ready for the first guided writing activity. It's a very short piece, about 50 words, and it's only 4 bullet points, pretty straightforward. There's only basically 3 sentences in containing a like and dislike. First one is just your name and age. Finally, this, of course, they won't do on the website. This is only to guide the teachers and to facilitate their work. But, you know, you could create your own one. And finally, 80 to 100 words where the kids are saying all those things. As you can see, this is reading for writing at its best because you, through extensive recycling, thorough processing means the students are really processing the text in its entirety. Extensive processing because you worked at different levels of the text. So not only all the vocabulary in the text, but also from the point of view of spelling, vocabulary, grammar, discourse building, and meaning. As you can see, in a remote learning environment, this is brilliant. I wish I had that in the past when I was a teacher, because that really allows the students, through masses of recycling and through task grading, to get the confidence and the knowledge to be able to produce output without Google Translator. The reason why kids offer Google Translator is because they don't get this. They get one reading comprehension, a few questions, maybe some vocabulary activity or some sorting task like categories, and that's it. That is not reading for writing. So I hope you either subscribe to the language and may use it for remote learning or teaching, or that you got some pointers to create your own narrow reading tasks like I do. At the moment, I'm actually co-writing a book with Dylan Viñales, my former colleague at Guardian International School, where he's head of Spanish, and we are actually creating a booklet based on these ideas. We got sentence builders, and we got this kind of sequence in a booklet of about 150 pages. It won't cost much, and we're gonna publish it on Amazon next month. So if you think there is a merit in doing this kind of work, you might want to purchase it. Okay, I hope to see you back on this channel, and just stay safe. I hope that everything goes well, and it's a terrible moment for everyone. Just be strong. We'll get there. All the best. Take care.